What if one man's vision reshaped the entire way humanity understands the world? What if his choices ignited a philosophical revolution that still influences science, politics, and ethics today? This is the story of Aristotle, philosopher, scientist, and tutor to Alexander the Great, whose relentless pursuit of knowledge challenged the greatest minds of his time and forever altered human thought. But how did a boy from a small coastal town rise to such monumental influence? Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. In the early 4th century before the Common Era, in the modest harbor town of Stagira on the Chalkidiki Peninsula, a child named Aristotle was born into a family of high reputation and ancient tradition. Stagira was alive with the clamor of merchants, craftsmen, sailors, and philosophers, a crossroads of ideas as much as of goods. Yet no one could foresee that this boy would become one of history's greatest thinkers. Aristotle's father, Nicomachus, was more than just a physician. He served as the court doctor to King Amyntas III of Macedon, the grandfather of the future Alexander the Great. His lineage claims descent from Asclepius, the god of medicine, grounding the family in a legacy of healing passed down through generations. This heritage was not built on guesswork, but on meticulous observation, logic, and experience, principles that would deeply influence young Aristotle's worldview. Growing up near the sea, surrounded by the scents of medicinal herbs, damp scrolls, clay vessels filled with tinctures, and gleaming metal instruments, Aristotle absorbed lessons far beyond textbooks. He watched as his father tended to patients with fevered bodies, broken limbs, and ailments that confounded even the most skilled healers. Every examination, palpating the abdomen, listening to breath, checking the pulse, was an intricate puzzle, each symptom a piece hinting at unseen causes. Nicomachus taught his son that the world followed order beneath apparent chaos. Health, he insisted, was not merely a physical state, but intertwined with lifestyle, climate, diet, mood, and one's relationship with the environment. These early lessons planted a seed within Aristotle, a conviction that nature concealed patterns, and behind every phenomenon lay reasons waiting to be uncovered. Accompanying his father on visits to villagers, fishermen, and city dwellers, Aristotle saw firsthand the profound impact of nature's forces on human existence. In the lowlands, fevers ran rampant. Higher altitudes brought cleaner air and different ailments. Those who toiled at sea faced illnesses unlike those who worked the fields. Each observation knitted together a complex tapestry of human life, interwoven with the world around it. But fate was cruel. When Aristotle was about 10 years old, his father died under mysterious circumstances. An unknown illness, perhaps, or something more sinister. The loss shattered the boy's world and thrust him into a reality where knowledge was not just power, but survival. How would this tragedy shape the restless mind destined to redefine human understanding? Aristotle would go on to challenge the towering legacy of Plato, forge a new philosophy, and create a framework that endured for over 2,000 years. His works penetrated logic, biology, politics, ethics, and even the cutting-edge realms of artificial intelligence. Without him, our entire worldview might be unrecognizable, a testament to the irreversible impact of one man's relentless quest for truth. This is the story of a thinker who taught humanity how to think, who turned observation into science, curiosity into reason, and questions into the foundations of knowledge. Join Quiet History as we unravel the fateful choices and profound consequences that shaped Aristotle's life, and through him, the fate of civilization itself. Subscribe to Quiet History for daily stories that bring the past alive with gripping detail and dramatic intensity. What if the forces shaping one man's destiny were driven by loss and relentless curiosity? What unseen decisions carved the path from orphaned boy to legendary philosopher? Aristotle's journey began in the shadow of tragedy, with a death that left him vulnerable and unmoored. His mother, Festida, passed away shortly after a tragic accident, leaving young Aristotle an orphan. The scant details about her life only deepened the mystery of his early years. Suddenly, a pivotal figure emerged, his relative Proxenus from Atarneus, a city on the coast of Asia Minor. But Proxenus was far more than a guardian. He was a man of letters, versed in philosophy, mathematics, poetry, and rhetoric, tasked with shaping a brilliant mind in a turbulent world. Under Proxenus's guidance, Aristotle's education unfolded like a living tapestry. Dawn after dawn, he memorized the epic verses of Homer, his voice weaving ancient tales into the morning air. Geometry and arithmetic followed, then rhetoric, and the legends that painted the cosmos. Each lesson sparked a fire of wonder, a hunger to understand not just facts, but the very essence of existence. But it was not mere book learning that defined his upbringing. Proxenus led him to the wild groves and shimmering springs near the shore, where nature whispered its secrets. Together they observed the delicate balance of life, why certain trees thrived only by water's edge, why birds bore beaks crafted for survival, why animals altered their habits as storms approached. These lessons planted a seed, nurturing Aristotle's relentless quest to grasp the hidden causes beneath the visible world. While others accepted the world as it appeared, Aristotle demanded answers. Why did the sun always rise in the east? Why did some plants bloom with spring's first breath, others wait until summer's heat? Why did iron sink while wood floated? And why did health vary so wildly among men? From earliest childhood he was more than curious. He was a thinker who sought to connect the threads of reality into coherent, unbreakable chains of cause and effect. His peers saw only a precocious boy. Those who knew him saw a mind far too vast for the narrow horizons of Stagira. By his 15th year, it was clear the town's limits were suffocating his ambition. Proxenus faced a fateful decision: to keep Aristotle safe at home, or send him to a place where great minds clashed and ideas burned bright. Athens, the intellectual heart of Greece. The choice was made. At 17, Aristotle stepped onto Athenian soil, a city unlike any other. Athens was no empire of grand palaces or towering walls. Its power lay in freedom, freedom of speech, thought, and relentless debate. In every gymnasium, every shaded portico, ideas fought and merged, shaping the very soul of civilization. But Aristotle's true destination was not the city itself, but a sanctuary of knowledge just beyond its northwestern gates. There, nestled among sacred groves, stood the Academy, founded by Plato 2 decades earlier and unrivaled across the Greek world. It was not a mere school, but a radical experiment, a place where learning was not a private affair, but a collective, systematic pursuit. Lectures, debates, a library, a garden for reflection. Every element designed to forge minds capable of transforming the world. Crossing the academy's threshold, Aristotle encountered Plato, then about 60 years old, a towering figure on the edge of legend. Plato was the disciple of Socrates and the architect of this intellectual fortress. This meeting was not just a step, but a leap into destiny, setting Aristotle on a path where every choice carried weight, every idea could alter the course of history. The question loomed, would this young seeker rise to the challenge or be crushed beneath the weight of his own ambition? If you want to uncover how Aristotle's fateful decisions shaped philosophy forever, subscribe to Quiet History and join us on this journey through the crucible of ideas and human courage. What happens when a prodigious mind is denied the throne of thought? Why was Aristotle, the brilliant pupil, overlooked as Plato's successor despite decades of loyalty? The year was 347 before our era, and the death of Plato ignited a storm of uncertainties for the future of philosophy. The Academy's leadership passed not to Aristotle, but to Speusippus, Plato's nephew, an architect of orthodox tradition. Was it a clash of ideas, political intrigue, or personal grudges that sealed Aristotle's fate? This rejection was more than a professional setback. It shattered his ties to Athens and forced him to confront an irrevocable choice. Athens was no longer a sanctuary for Aristotle. The city simmered with anti-Macedonian sentiment, a wave that swept toward anyone linked to the northern kingdom, including Aristotle himself, born into a city allied with Macedonia. Yet this estrangement ran deeper. Aristotle's philosophical vision had diverged sharply from Platonic ideals, moving toward a path that questioned metaphysical speculations and sought tangible truths in the natural world. The Academy was closing its doors on him, and with them, the very foundation of his intellectual identity. How could he continue when his home became hostile and his ideas unwelcome? The answer came from an unlikely source. Hermias, ruler of the city of Assos on the northwest coast of Asia Minor. A philosopher himself, a disciple of Eudoxus, and a devoted Platonist, Hermias dreamed of transforming Assos into a beacon for scholars and thinkers. To Aristotle, this was no mere political refuge, but a crucible for a new kind of inquiry, one rooted in observation, nature, and empirical study. Accepting Hermias's invitation was not just a relocation, it was a declaration of independence from the dogmas that had confined him. But this new beginning bore the weight of a break so profound, it could never be undone. In Assos, Aristotle found fertile ground for his relentless curiosity. Gone were the abstract dialectics of Athens. Here, philosophy merged with the meticulous study of living creatures. Alongside his friend and colleague, Xenocrates, he established a school that married philosophical rigor with natural science. Students like Theophrastus emerged, a mind destined to carry forward Aristotle's legacy and pioneer scientific botany. These early years in Assos were a whirlwind of discovery, where Aristotle's attention to detail was almost obsessive. But how did these natural investigations challenge the very foundations of traditional philosophy? Aristotle's days were consumed with the sea, hours spent aboard fishing boats, peering into the mysteries of marine life. He scrutinized the gills of fish, the fins that propelled them, the internal organs of cephalopods. Every anatomical nuance, every behavioral adaptation was a clue to the greater question. How do living beings organize their functions to survive in diverse environments? His notebooks filled with sketches and observations, each detail a small rebellion against metaphysical abstraction. Yet for all his dedication, the world beyond Assos was changing, and the consequences of his choices were only beginning to unfold. The rift between Aristotle and the Academy was not just philosophical, it was existential. By turning toward the natural world, he had stepped onto a path that isolated him from his former allies and exposed him to the precarious realities of political exile. The very act of inquiry became an act of defiance, a gamble whose stakes were personal freedom, intellectual survival, and the shaping of a legacy that would outlast the tumult of his times. Had Aristotle foreseen the irreversible nature of this moment? Or was he propelled forward by a desperate hunger to uncover truths that no one else dared to face? The death of Plato was not merely an end. It was the crucible that forged a new epoch in philosophy. For Aristotle, it meant exile from Athens, rejection by the Academy, and the birth of a revolutionary approach to understanding life itself. His journey from disciple to pioneer was marked by searing decisions and the relentless pursuit of knowledge that defied tradition. As he embarked on this perilous voyage, the echoes of his choice resonated far beyond the shores of Assos, setting in motion consequences that would reverberate through the ages. Yet the story does not end here. Aristotle's time in Assos was but the prologue to a profound transformation, both in his own work and in the history of ideas. His break with Plato's teachings opened doors to scientific inquiry that would later define Western thought. But every discovery came at a cost, every step forward shadowed by the fear of rejection and the burden of isolation. What would become of Aristotle's vision, and how would the world receive the truths he sought to reveal? These questions linger as Aristotle's journey presses onward toward new cities, new alliances, and new confrontations with fate itself. His exile was not a quiet retreat, but a crucible of irreversible choices, where knowledge and survival hung in a delicate, dangerous balance. The legacy of these turbulent years offers a gripping tale of human fear, resilience, and the price of breaking free from the past. Stay with us as we uncover the untold chapters of Aristotle's Odyssey, only here on Quiet History. Subscribe now to follow this epic voyage into the heart of philosophy's most dramatic turning point. What drives a man to shape the world forever? How do the decisions of a single philosopher ripple into the fate of empires? Aristotle, at the age of 41, stood at the crossroads of an extraordinary destiny, one that would intertwine his life with that of a future conqueror whose name would echo through time. But before his impact on history could unfold, he first faced a world fraught with peril and upheaval. Aristotle's journey was never confined to the abstract halls of thought. His mind raced beyond biology into the deepest mysteries of existence: causality, change, motion, essence, and form. It was here he forged the revolutionary doctrine of the four causes: material, formal, efficient, and final, a framework destined to become the bedrock of European science and philosophy. Yet this brilliant flame flickered dangerously amid the shadows of political intrigue and deadly conspiracies. Just years after Aristotle's arrival, the city of Hermerium was shattered by betrayal. A ruthless plot extinguished the life of the city's leader, and the once thriving state teetered on the brink of collapse. The philosophical school in Asti was silenced, its voice cut off by the brutal tides of power. Forced to flee, Aristotle sought refuge far from the chaos, setting course for the tranquil shores of Lesbos, a place where his relentless quest for knowledge would take a daring new form. On the wind-swept coast of Mytilene, Aristotle embarked on what would become the most intense empirical phase of his career. Here, amid the roar of the sea and the whisper of the forests, he pioneered the first principles of biological classification. Blood or no blood, methods of breathing, limb structures, patterns of nourishment and reproduction. He meticulously grouped living beings, unveiling nature's intricate order. This systematic comparison was no mere cataloging. It was the birth of empirical biology itself. But life on Lesbos was more than science. Amidst the quiet pursuit of truth, Aristotle forged bonds that would entangle his fate further. He married Pythias, the niece of his late friend and patron Hermias, weaving his destiny into the fabric of a fragile society. Their union bore a son, Nicomachus, the child who would inspire one of Aristotle's greatest legacies, the Nicomachean Ethics, a guide to virtue and human character. Beyond biology and family, Aristotle's thoughts spiraled into the essence of human society, what binds a city, what sustains justice, and what tears a state apart. These reflections would crystallize into his political philosophy, a blueprint for governance and stability, later immortalized in his treatise, Politics. Yet even as the shores of Lesbos offered peace, the distant tremors of Macedonian ambition stirred, threatening to upend Aristotle's world once again. Across the Aegean, King Philip II of Macedonia was forging a vision of conquest and reform, preparing his son Alexander not merely to inherit a throne, but to command a world. Recognizing the unparalleled mind of Aristotle, shaped by years at Plato's academy and countless expeditions into nature's secrets, Philip extended a summons that would alter the course of history. Aristotle was called to Pella, the Macedonian capital, to become the young prince's tutor and guide into the trials of rulership and war. This invitation was no accident. The ties between Aristotle's family and the Macedonian court ran deep. His father had served as a court physician to King Amyntas III, Philip's father, forging bonds of loyalty and influence across generations. More than that, Aristotle's reputation as a thinker who combined rigorous reflection with acute observation of the real world made him the perfect mentor for a future conqueror. The stakes were immense. Alexander's decisions would shape not just Macedonia, but the fate of the entire Hellenic world. As Aristotle stepped into this new role, the weight of history pressed down upon him. Every lesson, every word spoken to young Alexander could ignite an empire or doom it to ruin. The philosopher's legacy was no longer confined to scrolls and lectures. It was alive in the blood, the ambition, and the destiny of a boy who would become a legend. And with that, the fragile balance between knowledge and power, philosophy and war, teetered on the edge of an irreversible future. What choices would Aristotle make, knowing that his teachings could unleash both greatness and destruction? How would the man who sought to understand the causes of all things navigate the storm of ambition and empire? The answers lie buried in the shadows of history, where every decision echoed with the irreversible consequences of human fear, hope, and destiny. Subscribe to Quiet History to witness the unfolding saga of Aristotle and Alexander. A tale of minds and empires, of fate and free will, where every word could tip the balance toward glory or oblivion. What does it take to shape a future king who will change the entire ancient world? How do you mold a mind that will command empires, forge alliances, and face impossible choices? When Aristotle arrived in Macedonia, Alexander was just 13, yet already a boy unlike any other. His mind was sharp, his curiosity boundless, his memory extraordinary. But could even Aristotle's teachings prepare him for the storm of destiny ahead? Aristotle understood the weight of his task, not merely to fill Alexander's head with knowledge, but to shape the very way he thought, to teach him to grasp the laws of society, the nature of reality, the delicate balance of power. Every lesson carried the shadow of what was to come, the making of a ruler who would leave an indelible mark on history. And yet, as the young prince's path veered toward monumental conquests, Aristotle's own journey was reaching a pivotal crossroads. As Macedonia braced for upheaval, Aristotle knew his chapter with Alexander was ending. The boy who would soon redraw maps and alter the fate of nations no longer needed his direct guidance. Instead, Aristotle set his sights on Athens, a city transformed, fractured by the rising dominance of Macedonia, yet still alive with intellectual fire. But Athens was no longer the sanctuary it once was, and Aristotle himself was no longer a student or a mere philosopher. He returned as a titan of thought, carrying nearly 2 decades of experience, from the halls of Plato's Academy to the royal courts of Macedonia, from intense research to the intimate mentorship of a future conqueror. His vision was clear and defiant: to establish a school that fused philosophy with empirical science, that rejected abstract ideals in favor of observable reality. It was a bold repudiation of his own past, a revolution in how knowledge would be pursued. Aristotle's new school rose near the temple of Apollo Lycaeus, nestled within groves and colonnades, the Lyceum. Here, students called peripatetics roamed the shaded paths, learning through movement and dialogue, through the marriage of thought and nature. Unlike Plato's Academy, where eternal truths were chased in abstract debate, Aristotle demanded something harsher, more tangible. Truth rooted in the very fabric of the world, revealed not by speculation, but by careful observation. The structure of learning at the Lyceum was rigorous and unforgiving. Mornings belonged to the inner circle, the achromatic lectures, dense, complex courses probing the deepest mysteries of existence: metaphysics, logic, physics, ethics, psychology, politics, rhetoric, and poetics. These were not mere lessons, but battles for understanding the causes of things, the essence of being, the mechanics of the soul, the forces shaping human destiny. But as daylight faded, the school opened its doors to a broader audience. The exoteric lectures brought philosophy to the many, addressing practical concerns and inviting all seekers. Yet beneath the surface of these teachings lay an urgent question. Could knowledge alone steer the course of a troubled world? Could wisdom protect Athens from the irreversible tides of power and fear sweeping through the ancient Mediterranean? Aristotle's legacy was a chain of fateful decisions. His choice to mentor Alexander, his refusal to return to old doctrines, his founding of a school that challenged the very foundations of thought. Each step carried consequences that rippled far beyond his lifetime, shaping not only philosophies, but the fragile fate of civilizations. The question remains, can the pursuit of truth outpace the relentless march of human ambition and fear? And now, as we peer back through the centuries, what lessons does this dramatic saga hold for us? Is it possible that the seeds of empire, philosophy, and unyielding destiny were sown in those shaded walks beneath Athens' ancient trees? Or was it all just a prelude to the inevitable chaos of irreversible choices? The answers linger in the silence between the steps of the peripatetics, waiting, watching. If you've been captivated by this journey through history's crossroads, join Quiet History for more stories where every decision changes the world. Subscribe now and step into the past where fate was forged by minds as brilliant as they were burdened. What if every piece of knowledge you thought was absolute depended on relentless questioning and tireless observation? What if the very foundation of science was forged in the crucible of human fear, uncertainty, and irreversible choices? How did Aristotle, a man burdened with the weight of Plato's legacy, dare to challenge the old ways and build something unprecedented? The story of Lyceum is not just about knowledge. It is about the ruthless pursuit of truth that would reshape the world. Aristotle's Lyceum wasn't merely a school. It was an intellectual battlefield where philosophy met raw reality. Unlike the solitary reflections of Plato's Academy, Aristotle orchestrated a collective enterprise. His students were dispatched across the sprawling landscapes of Greece, Asia Minor, the islands of the Aegean, and the deserts of Egypt, capturing the pulse of nature and society. They documented everything, from animal behaviors to political systems, transforming distant observations into the DNA of scientific inquiry. But this was just the beginning. The stakes were higher than anyone dared imagine. In the heart of the Lyceum, Aristotle birthed one of history's first scientific libraries, an archive that defied the limits of human memory and ambition. He painstakingly curated and categorized texts, annotating and indexing with surgical precision. This was no ordinary collection. It was the largest reservoir of knowledge in all of Hellenic civilization. Yet the library was only a fortress for the mind. Beyond its walls, Aristotle propelled research into uncharted territories, blending philosophy with the empirical rigor of observation. Was this the dawn of modern science, or the beginning of an obsession that would consume him? Aristotle's genius lay in his conviction that understanding the natural world demanded more than abstract speculation. It required meticulous, collective investigation. His Lyceum became a laboratory where dissecting animals, studying embryonic development, and cataloging plants, minerals, and climates were everyday endeavors. The tension between theory and experience, reason and observation, was a constant, unyielding force. Could knowledge be truly grasped without facing the unpredictable chaos of reality? Every day at the Lyceum was a relentless cascade of intellectual rigor. Aristotle's schedule was a ceaseless whirlwind. Morning lectures for pupils hungry for wisdom, midday gatherings where research factions collided with ideas, public evening lectures that kindled the flames of curiosity, and late-night sessions of painstaking revision. These were not mere routines. They were battles, fought hour by hour against ignorance and error. And in the relentless grind, every word, every observation bore the weight of irreversible consequences. But what truly set the Lyceum apart was its vision. Knowledge was a living organism, not a static monument. Here, philosophy intertwined with natural science, logic embraced empirical data, and metaphysics confronted concrete facts. This radical fusion challenged centuries of tradition and laid the foundation for the university concept itself, a sanctuary where inquiry was free, where every answer birthed a new question. Yet, could this fragile balance hold against the tides of dogma and skepticism? Aristotle dedicated his entire existence to constructing a comprehensive systematic worldview, an encyclopedic vision encompassing nature, society, language, culture, and the state. This was no mere academic project. It was his life's obsession, a colossal intellectual edifice erected on the belief that truth must be anchored in experience and observation, not just pure reason. But behind this monumental quest lurked the shadow of uncertainty. What if the foundations cracked? If the relentless pursuit led to blind alleys and irrevocable errors? Unlike Plato, whose dialogues painted polished philosophical landscapes, Aristotle engaged in a far grittier endeavor. He sought the causes, structures, and patterns underlying everything. His approach demanded an unflinching gaze into nature's depths and human complexity, a commitment that risked alienation and misunderstanding. The Lyceum was no longer just a school. It had become a crucible where ideas collided and destinies were forged. The choices made within those walls would echo through centuries, shaping not only knowledge, but the very essence of human thought. This was the dawn of a revolution in thought, born from one man's unyielding will to merge the abstract with the tangible. Aristotle's Lyceum became the birthplace of a new intellectual tradition, one that would ripple through the ages, influencing every corner of the Western world. Yet, as the shadows lengthened, one question remained. Would this flame of knowledge illuminate the path ahead, or consume the very minds that kindled it? If you want to journey deeper into the crucible where ancient knowledge was forged, subscribe to Quiet History. The story of Aristotle in the Lyceum is just the beginning. Stay with us as we unravel the fate of ideas that shaped civilization forever. What happens when the greatest mind of his era faces the storm of political upheaval? Aristotle, the towering intellect who crafted the very foundations of logic, found himself caught in a deadly crossfire of fear and suspicion. His life's work, an exhaustive, precise encyclopedia of knowledge, was about to collide with a world unraveling beneath his feet. The question was brutal. Could reason survive when the empire that protected it crumbled? Aristotle's writings weren't stories or poetry. They were raw scientific records, lectures, notes, filled with definitions and classifications, utterly devoid of ornamentation. His approach was relentless precision. At the core of his entire intellectual system was logic, the discipline he essentially invented. Before him, no one had formalized the rules of correct thinking. His groundbreaking work revealed deduction's architecture, introducing the syllogism, a logical tool where two premises inevitably lead to a conclusion. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This wasn't just clever phrasing. It was the birth of structured reasoning itself. But Aristotle's great achievement was more than logic. He sought to map reality in its full complexity, creating a living encyclopedia that described everything from the stars to politics. This monumental project was not a solo endeavor. His school, the Lyceum, was a hive of scholarly activity, students gathering data, observing nature, classifying creatures and ideas, all under Aristotle's towering vision. Yet as this intellectual fortress grew, the world outside darkened with uncertainty. Then, in 323 years before our era, an earth-shattering shock struck the Hellenic world. Alexander the Great, the conqueror who had redrawn the map from Greece to India in mere years, died suddenly in Babylon. The man who had forged an empire with iron will was no more. The fragile peace his rule maintained shattered instantly. Rebellions erupted across conquered lands. City-states saw their chance and rose up, hungry to reclaim lost freedom. Athens, the heart of Greek culture, was consumed by a wildfire of anti-Macedonian fury. Public assemblies roared with calls to purge anyone linked to the fallen king. The atmosphere thickened with paranoia. Accusations flew like arrows. Among those targeted was Aristotle, the philosopher who had once been tutor to Alexander himself, the man whose school thrived under Macedonian patronage. His ties to the royal house were undeniable, and that association now painted a target on his back. Aristotle had never held political office nor wielded power in the governance of city-states. He was an observer, a thinker, not a politician. Yet in the eyes of the enraged masses, this distinction meant little. The charges soon followed, a formal accusation of impiety, of offending the gods, the very same charge that had condemned Socrates to death decades before. The threat was grave. Fear, anger, and the thirst for retribution had clouded reason. Aware of the peril, Aristotle made a fateful decision. He chose silence over defiance, retreat over confrontation. His words echoed through history. I will not allow the Athenians to sin against philosophy a second time. Without hesitation, without public defense, without delay, he left Athens forever. His destination was Chalcis, the city of his mother, a place of refuge and ancestral land. There, far from the chaos consuming Greece's mainland, he sought sanctuary. Chalcis offered a stark contrast to the turmoil left behind. Nestled by the shore and wrapped in olive groves and gardens, the city felt distant from the tempests ravaging Athens. Aristotle quickly settled in, his home close to nature's calm. Yet the philosopher did not cease his work. He continued to teach, surrounded by devoted students who traveled from the Lyceum, carrying manuscripts, drafts, and questions. The pursuit of knowledge endured, even as the world outside convulsed with uncertainty and conflict. This was a turning point, a moment when a man who once shaped an empire's mind was reduced to exile, a fugitive from the very city that birthed Western thought. Aristotle's exile was not just physical but symbolic, a testament to how fragile reason becomes when fear takes hold. The decisions made in those tense days reshaped philosophy and power forever. What was at stake? The survival of wisdom itself in the face of irreversible choice. If you found this journey into Aristotle's turbulent final years compelling, subscribe to Quiet History for more stories where human fear and monumental decisions collide, revealing how history's greatest minds have navigated their most perilous moments. What happens when a mind races against time itself? Aristotle, the towering philosopher, knew his days were numbered as his work intensified, not lessened, pushing toward a final clarity that demanded completion before the inevitable end. But what shadow loomed over his fading life? Some say a lifelong stomach ailment haunted him, a secret torment from youth. Others blame the crushing weight of stress and exhaustion, amplified by the sudden exile from Athens to Chalcis. Yet none can confirm the exact cause. By the time he reached Chalcis, he was about 62, an age revered in the ancient world, yet perilously close to the edge of mortality. Despite his failing health, Aristotle's mind remained relentless. Until his final days, he dictated corrections to his treatises, revisited old notes, and meticulously organized decades of knowledge on animals, stars, poetics, rhetoric, politics, physics, metaphysics, and logic. Every detail mattered as his legacy took shape. But as the world around him darkened, he withdrew ever more into solitude, sitting beneath the shade of ancient trees, watching clouds drift, birds soar, and the wind whisper. These natural phenomena had stirred his thoughts since childhood. Now they marked his twilight reflections. And with one final wish, he demanded to be buried next to his wife, Pythias, in their family plot. His instructions extended beyond death. Clear orders for his funeral, his estate, and, crucially, the fate of the Lyceum. Aristotle entrusted its leadership to Theophrastus, his closest friend and disciple, a botanist and scholar destined to preserve the school's flame. But would the Lyceum survive the coming storms? In the year 322 before our era, Aristotle died. That same year marked the outbreak of the Lamian War, a desperate bid by Athens and allied city-states to shatter Macedonian dominance, a war that would end in defeat, sealing Athens' loss of political independence. Yet Aristotle's eyes closed before this final tragedy unfolded. Remarkably scant are the records of his death. No grand funeral, no public honors. His ashes were laid to rest quietly in Chalcis, by his wife's side, fulfilling his final command. The man who sought to paint a complete picture of the cosmos left the world without fanfare, his legacy cloaked in silence. But darkness could not extinguish his light. Few could foresee then that Aristotle's works would not merely outlive him. They would form the intellectual bedrock of countless centuries. They would endure the fall of Greek city-states, the collapse of Alexander's empire, and the ruins of Rome itself. They would survive the shadowed Middle Ages, only to be reborn in universities across Europe. Immediately after his death, Theophrastus assumed control of the Lyceum. He safeguarded Aristotle's vast library, archives, and scattered manuscripts. As a distinguished botanist and naturalist, Theophrastus not only preserved, but expanded the school's influence. Under his guidance, the Lyceum thrived for nearly 2 centuries. Yet the world was shifting. The Hellenistic age saw philosophical centers migrate from Athens to Alexandria, Abydos, and other eastern Mediterranean hubs. Within the walls of the legendary Alexandrian library, Aristotle's works were treasured, studied, and copied. His ideas now a cornerstone of an evolving intellectual empire. But how could one man's pursuit of knowledge ripple through millennia, shaping minds and civilizations long after his earthly journey ended? The fate of Aristotle's legacy was tied to fragile decisions, by him, by Theophrastus, by generations who chose to keep his flame alive despite war, collapse, and the relentless march of time. As we reflect on Aristotle's final days and the forces that shaped his death and legacy, we confront a timeless question. What does it mean to make a choice when history itself hangs in the balance? Will you join us on Quiet History to explore the echoes of those fateful moments? Subscribe now and uncover the human stories behind the greatest ideas ever conceived. What if the wisdom of one of history's greatest minds was lost to time? What happens when the fragile chain of knowledge is broken, leaving centuries in darkness? Aristotle's works once illuminated the path of human understanding, but would this light survive the storm of history? In the twilight of antiquity, the legacy of Aristotle faced fierce scrutiny. Neoplatonists, Stoics, and skeptics confronted his ideas, not with blind acceptance, but with sharp debate. They challenged and reshaped his teachings, selectively rejecting some doctrines while embracing others. Yet, despite this intellectual turmoil, Aristotle's contributions to logic, biology, rhetoric, and political theory remained pillars of authority, guiding scholars through turbulent times. But would this fragile balance endure? As the Roman Empire crumbled, the fate of Aristotle's vast corpus became uncertain. The West entered the early Middle Ages, a time when much of his profound knowledge vanished into obscurity. The Latin world clung to only fragments, his logical treatises such as Categories, On Interpretation, and Topics, while entire realms of physics, metaphysics, biology, psychology, politics, and rhetoric slipped into oblivion, unreachable and forgotten. How could such irreplaceable wisdom simply disappear? This loss was not merely accidental. It was the consequence of harsh decisions, shifting cultural tides, and the relentless march of history. The irrevocable severing of knowledge shaped an intellectual void that would influence centuries of thought. What might mankind have achieved if these works had survived intact? The story of Aristotle's fragmented legacy is a haunting reminder of how human fear, conflict, and fate can determine the course of civilization. Yet the spark of Aristotle's thought refused to die. Across the shadows of the medieval era, a slow but inexorable revival began, promising to reclaim lost truths and reignite the flame of inquiry. But that is a story for another chapter in Quiet History. For now, imagine the fragile thread upon which the ancient world's wisdom balanced, and how close it came to being severed forever. If you found this journey into the shadows of lost knowledge compelling, subscribe to Quiet History to uncover more stories where every choice echoes through time.